Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. Today we're going to be taking a look at Nikon's new D810. I did use a lot of restraint because there are a lot of people posting first impression videos and things like that without having to in the camera. And of course I always like to have the camera in hand before I do any type of review or preview or anything like that. The D810 looks almost identical to the D800, as you guys will see in a moment whenever we look at them up close. With this camera though, Nikon added some newer features. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say right now, if you already own a D800E or a D800, more than likely the upgrade is not going to be worth it. Unless maybe you need one of the newer specific features that the D810 now brings to the table. Otherwise, the D800 and D800E are both still very, very fantastic cameras. With that being said though, some of the bigger things that I noticed about this camera, feature-wise, there's actually lots and lots of new features on this, but I'm going to kind of hit some of the high points first. The first thing to know is this camera is still 36 megapixels effective resolution. Now the total pixels on the center actually is a bit higher on the D810. So that tells us right there that this camera, while it has the same final image output, it actually is not the same sensor as the D800 or the D800E. This new sensor also has a new ISO range that is now native from ISO 64 up to ISO 12800, whereas the D800 was from ISO 100 to ISO 6400. So we do have a bit more ISO range on the new camera. And also on this camera, unlike the D800 and D800E, this camera actually does not have an optical low pass filter. Now, the D800E actually still had an optical low pass filter, but in order to keep some continuity in sensor design between the E model and the standard 800, Nikon actually just put in another filter in the 800E to cancel out the effects of that optical low pass filter. With the 810, since this is an entirely different model, and thanks to some newer algorithms and the new processor in this camera, Nikon felt comfortable enough to go ahead and completely remove the low pass filter altogether in this model. So, you know, if you are doing any type of landscape photography or, portrait photography or anything like that, you will see much sharper results. And we may find out how much sharper in a later video. Once again, as always, depending on what you guys say in the comments below, that's going to be kind of how I determine what direction to take in future videos. The other thing that we see on this camera, speaking of the processor, it is a new Expeed 4 processor, and of course it does bring about other things as well. It does give us more frame rate out of this camera. So having the D800 shoot 4 frames a second, of course 4 frames a second is not terribly fast, but whenever you start considering that that camera was pushing around 36 megapixel files, 4 frames a second is actually, actually pretty acceptable given the technology of the time. However, this camera with the newer processor is actually up from that 4 frames a second. This one can do 5 frames a second at the full 36 megapixel resolution. The other thing is, if you put this camera in the DX crop mode, you can actually get 6 frames a second without having to use the battery grip and larger battery. If you do use the battery grip with either AA's or Nikon's larger capacity battery, you will get a maximum of 7 frames a second out of this camera. So very, very impressive there. Let's see, what else do we have here? Of course, new LCD screen. It's still 3.2 inches, but now it's up to 1.2 million dots, up from the 920,000 dots. No doubt this one has some more Sony tech in it, because the screen on this is a screen that is not just RGB, but it also adds white pixels to the display as well. So it kind of sounds like Sony's white magic LCD technology to me, even though Nikon doesn't advertise that. But anyways, that'll give you a little bit more contrast out of your display, particularly if you're shooting outdoors in bright lighting conditions, things like that. And of course, with it being a bit higher dot count, it is going to be a bit sharper image as well. We do have the OLED viewfinder information. So instead of that standard green viewfinder readout that we were used to in all the Nikon cameras, this one's kind of a newer color. It looks like it's a lot crisper, it's a lot sharper. and it's got kind of a teal color to it. We first saw this on the Nikon D7100, so that's nice as well. And let's see here. It is the same 51-point autofocus system, of course tweaked. It gets lots of tweaks from the D4S focus system, so it is much faster about acquiring the initial focus. I will come up with some sort of way to test this so I can show you guys. I did have an opportunity to try it a little bit today. I've literally only shot with this camera for probably about 20 or 30 minutes so far, so I'm definitely not comfortable talking about that in detail yet, but I can tell already, just from the moment I powered it on, I could tell that it was much faster with acquiring focus when using a 24-70 2.8 lens. They also give us the new group area mode as well. That's something we'll take a look at whenever I look at the camera up close here. Let's see here, what else do we have? One thing that I didn't realize, and this is actually something that I didn't realize until later about my D800. Normally the D800 is, what I use to record the videos. And it wasn't until recently that I discovered that you can't use auto ISO whenever you are shooting in manual mode in the video mode. Now you can do that if you're shooting still photos, but being able to have your ISO in automatic during a video recording is very useful, because oftentimes you want to set your f-stop to something and you don't want to keep on changing that because your video is going to have differences in depth of field. But you may not want to change your shutter speed either to affect the brightness of the picture, because if you change shutter speed, you're going to run into a situation where the motion in your video may not be rendered the way you want it to be. So if you have your f-stop and your shutter speed locked down, having the auto ISO is very, very good for allowing the camera to adjust for differences in lighting conditions when you're shooting video. So that's something that's a very big deal to me. We do have zebra stripes now for checking focus in video mode too. And of course, uncompressed HDMI out. The built-in microphone is also a stereo microphone on this new 810, whereas it wasn't on the 800. Although, of course, for any serious video, you want to go to some type of external microphone or an external recording solution. And let's see here. So lots and lots of new features. Definitely write me in the comments below to kind of tell me what you guys want to do next. I definitely feel like some testing is in order, of course. But until then, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this camera up close and compare it with the controls and everything of the D800. Taking a closer look at the camera, we can now talk about some of the physical differences between this 810 and the D800 and D800E. A couple other things I wanted to mention real fast though. In terms of video, this camera also does have the ability to record 1080p at 60 frames a second now. And we also have the ability to use the power aperture feature in video mode whenever we are recording to the internal memory cards. We don't have to be using an external recorder like we did on the D800 and D800E. I'm going to show you guys a little video clip of how the whole power aperture thing works. Basically, it allows you to be able to progressively change your aperture, and I found it particularly useful whenever you combined it with the auto ISO capabilities of the D810. I am very new to video still, guys, so maybe you guys can provide a little bit of feedback for me on that. But as you can see, it does allow for progressive aperture change in video mode. So something else that we have here, we also have a new flat picture control mode, which basically allows you to have a little bit more dynamic range in your video. So if you're wanting to do more advanced color grading to video and things like that, and you want to have a more neutral starting point with less contrast and such, that's what that mode is going to be good for. Okay, so we'll look at the camera up close here. If you look at the doors here, notice that they're all individual doors now. The thing about the D800 is this is a solid door, and on the D600 and 610, this is something I've gotten used to, having all those doors individual. The 800, let me grab my 800 here. The 800, as you can see, sure enough, is a solid door there. So if you want to get to one port, you have to open up everything. They also played with the controls a little bit on this camera. Looking at the back here, the first thing, of course, is the metering. The metering option on the 800 encircles the auto exposure lock, just like it has on all the previous Nikons in this range, like the 300 and 700, and heck, that even goes back to the Nikon D810. So kind of a change on this one. This one basically gets a setup that's like the D4 and D3 cameras, where you have the metering up top now, and that replaces the bracketing button on the D800. So since there isn't a bracketing button up here on top anymore, they decided to move the bracketing over to the side now. So now the bracketing is over on the side of the camera near the flash button, or flash exposure compensation button. So basically it's in the same spot that it is on like a D7100 or something like that, which that actually makes more sense. They've also added a second info button back here. So now we have our main info button, and of course notice guys that the LCD looks different. It looks just like the one on the DF, so a little bit different display there. I did find it easier to read, but you used to hit this button and then hit a second time to be able to select things here. Now what you do is the info button just turns it on and off, and you hit the second info button, and that actually allows you to be able to come through here and select things. So if we compare to the 800 here, sure enough, you hit the info button, hit it again, you start selecting things, hit it again, and it turns off again. So a little bit different. I kind of do like having the second info button once I got used to it, but of course it did take a little getting used to. Over here, this may sound dumb guys, but I was actually excited about this one little stupid piece of rubber here. It doesn't seem like it'd make a big difference, but whenever you're holding the camera, it actually does make it a bit easier to hold on to. And of course on the D800, it does not have any rubber over its memory card door. So yeah, all in all, very nice. We still have 2 card slots here, an SD as well as a compact flash. You have a new continuous mode up here on the dial too. You've got quiet mode and continuous now. The cool thing about this camera though is the fact that it's actually very, very quiet even without putting the quiet mode on. The quiet mode on Nikon actually still kind of sucks. But you don't need it because the camera itself is quiet. So if we take the 800 here, I'm going to take a quick shot with it and you guys can kind of listen. So it's pretty loud, very metallic sounding. The 810 shutter is actually even quieter than the shutter on the D600 and D610 and the DF. So yeah, it's actually quite a bit quieter. Not that big of a deal for a lot of people, but for me, I actually like that. If we take a look at our video options in here, let's see here, video options. We'll notice that on this one, of course, you've got lots more options here. You can do 60 frames a second in 1080p, just like I mentioned. They also have added a few other things here too. You can change the frequency response of the microphone. Thought that was kind of interesting. And of course, my favorite part, you can now have auto ISO control whenever you are shooting video in manual mode. So that is a beautiful thing. So a couple of other areas where Nikon changed up a few things. Live view menu. Whenever we go into the live view menu, notice now that right now I am doing the still photo live view. If I hit our second information button here, it brings up a little side menu. One of the biggest things in here is the fact that we can now do this split screen display zooming. So you can actually have the camera viewing 2 different spots in the live view display simultaneously. I'm not really sure how I feel about this. It's something I'd have to play around with more. You guys can kind of see how you can set that up. You can move this one around to one spot, and then you can move the other view around to another spot. So of course you can see how it's changing down there in that little preview. I'm not sure how I feel about this. It's kind of interesting. I could see using this for like architectural or landscape photography. I'm not that kind of photographer, so I don't think I'd ever make use of that, but it is cool nonetheless. And of course, I do like having this side menu here, so we can toggle through a lot of the common things. If we switch over to the video live view now, you'll notice that we can hit the same information display, and we can change things a lot now. I do believe that you can also change your recording levels, your audio levels while you're recording now, which is cool. But we've got a few other things in here. We've got all those other options I mentioned before as far as the wind noise reduction and all that. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you guys one other thing over here too. There's also the electronic curtain. So if you have the camera on mirror lockup, you can actually come in here and you can go down to right there, and then you can turn that on, and that'll turn on the electronic first curtain. So that actually helps reduce vibration inside the camera whenever you're doing any type of tripod work or anything like that. It is also worth mentioning that Nikon claims that they've redesigned the shutter mechanism and mirror box. So the mirror is supposed to give you less bounce, and the shutter blades are made of a new material, so you get less internal vibration inside the camera. A lot of Nikon users made a big deal about the massive files coming out of this camera. So because of that, Nikon has introduced a new SRaw mode. Notice that I have this camera set to RAW right now. But if we come down here and go to NEF RAW recording, we can come in here now and we can change this. So now it says image size, it says RAW large, which defaults to lossless compression and 14 bits. If we go in here, we can now go down to a small RAW, which is a 9 megapixel file, like that. And now, of course, the other options are grayed out. In the small RAW, it's basically compressed and it's 12 bits instead of 14. At first, I really wasn't thinking a whole lot about this. Apparently, Nikon kind of designed this with like time-lapse photography and things like that in mind. And actually, that actually makes sense. For what I do, though, I would absolutely never use this. So anyways, back to large. The other thing worth mentioning is this camera's focus system. This camera still changes focus just like all the other Nikon bodies these days. You have a button over here, which I did notice they changed. On the older Nikon bodies, it looks like that. Now it has little dots on it. I guess that helps you find it a little bit better. But anyways, it works the same way. You press and hold it down, and while you're holding it down, you can rotate your back dial here, and you can go between single and continuous. If you rotate the front dial, then you can change your area mode. This camera does have a new area mode, and this is this one right here called Group. So basically, if you want the accuracy of single point focus, and you don't want the camera to dynamically change points, but you're dealing with a target that's a little bit harder to get one single point on, you can use several points in a group. So that's basically how this works. And you can use this in single point shooting, or you can use it in continuous shooting as well. So once again, for what I do, I'm mainly doing portraits, things like that. So for like 90% of all my shooting, I personally end up in just a standard single point mode. But if you are doing any type of action or anything like that, I can see where certain types of subjects can see where it could be very, very useful. We will be looking at this camera a lot more. I know I crammed a lot of stuff into this video, guys, and that's mostly just because I won't have this D810 in my hands for very long. They're going pretty quickly these days. But definitely write me in the comments below so I'll kind of get an idea or get some ideas for the next video. And hopefully I'll have more time to spend with this camera. I may go ahead and take a few sample photos as well. I'll take a few starting at about 1600 ISO and go up to 12,800 or something like that. And then I'll take a few with the 800 as well, and we can have some comparisons there. I don't know if anything will open up the RAW files from this camera. I think Nikon's new NXD software will, possibly. But I will go ahead and take some samples. If there's not a description in the link below, just know that I'm waiting on the software update. but by the time this video is out, hopefully I'll have all that sorted. Definitely don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Write me in the comments below. That's where I get my ideas for more videos. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.